The rumor said the Navy handed its frogmen a pistol built to be thrown away. Fire it once on a mission, then sink it in the nearest canal before the sun came up. That story has circulated in gun collector circles for years, repeated so often it now sounds like settled history. It isn't. The real story is stranger, and it was hiding in plain sight the whole time. Inside a small rubber disc nobody thought to ask about. By 1967, the newly formed SEAL teams were operating deep in the Mekong Delta and the jungles ringing Da Nang, moving at night, moving in silence, because silence was the entire mission. A rifle shot in the dark told every enemy soldier within a mile exactly where you stood. Before a SEAL squad could even reach its objective, it often had to get past something far more alert than a sleeping sentry, a guard dog trained to bark at the first unfamiliar footstep. Killing that dog quietly, without waking the camp beside it, became its own tactical problem, and the standard-issue rifles and revolvers of the era were the wrong tool entirely. The SEALs weren't starting from nothing. Some units carried the old well rod, a bolt-action British design left over from the Second World War, built for the Special Operations Executive to eliminate sentries at close range without a sound. Others carried suppressed Walther PPKs, small and easy to conceal, but underpowered for reliable one-shot stops. Both had real limitations. The well rod was slow, a single manually cycled shot at a time, awkward to reload under pressure. The PPK's tiny caliber meant a hit didn't always end the fight quietly, and a wounded, panicking guard dog was almost as dangerous to a mission as an alert one. The SEALs wanted something larger, more powerful, and faster to bring back into action, without giving up the silence that made the whole approach worth attempting in the first place. There was already a candidate sitting close at hand. Smith & Wesson's Model 39 had been developed in the early 1950s by company engineer Carl Hellstrom, a lighter, double-action semi-automatic built around the 9mm cartridge. And by the mid-1960s, it had already caught the attention of American law enforcement. In 1967, the Illinois State Police adopted the Model 39 for duty use, becoming the first large American law enforcement agency to issue a semi-automatic pistol as standard equipment. That adoption put the gun in front of people inside the Department of the Navy who were already hunting for a suppressor-ready platform. And the Navy bought a small batch of Model 39s for testing not long after. Those test guns eventually filtered down to the special warfare community, where SEALs already carrying 9mm ammunition for their Swedish K submachine guns found the caliber convenient and the platform sound. From there, engineers at the Naval Ordnance Laboratory took that already trusted, steel-framed 9mm and rebuilt it from the barrel out for one specific job. They lengthened the barrel by an inch and threaded the end to accept a suppressor. They raised the sights so a shooter could still see over the bulk of the can. And they added something almost no other service pistol in the world had: a manual slide lock. Flip it on, and the slide stayed shut when the gun fired, refusing to cycle back and eject the spent case. That single decision killed the mechanical clack of the action, the third and often overlooked source of gunshot noise, leaving only one flat, muffled report and nothing else. The Navy designated it the Mark 22 Mod 0. The men who carried it called it the Hush Puppy, a nod to its first and most literal job. That much sits on solid ground, confirmed by the weapon's own Navy designation records and repeated consistently across the historians who've spent decades tracing this program's paper trail. What comes after is where a good story quietly replaced careful engineering. Here's the version that made the rounds for years. The Hush Puppy was built to be a one-and-done weapon, carried into the field and left behind afterward, because a suppressed pistol in enemy hands was too dangerous a liability to risk keeping around. It's a dramatic image, and it fits the mystique that's grown up around SEAL history in general. But the paper trail doesn't support it, and the version that's easiest to verify is far more mundane, which is usually a good sign that it's the true one. What actually got treated as consumable, mission after mission, wasn't the pistol. It was the suppressor's insides. The Mark III Mod 0 suppressor screwed onto that threaded barrel relied on wipes. Thin rubber discs stacked one behind another inside the can that a bullet had to physically punch through on its way out the muzzle. Each wipe sealed the bore for a fraction of a second longer than an open tube would, trapping expanding propellant gas and stripping away most of the muzzle blast before it ever reached open air. By the accounts of operators and armorers who worked with the system, it genuinely worked, quieter than almost anything else fielded by any side in that war. But every round that tore through those discs degraded them a little more. Sources disagree on exactly how many shots a set of wipes was good for, anywhere from as few as half a dozen to as many as 50, depending on the specific wipe material, the ammunition, and how the weapon was maintained in the field. That spread is worth being honest about, rather than picking a tidy number to sound authoritative. What every account agrees on is the pattern. After a limited number of shots, the wipes stopped sealing properly. The suppressor got noticeably louder, and the entire reason the weapon existed started to fail. Armorers and operators responded to that limitation the only way that made sense. They treated the wipes as a consumable, something to be replaced constantly, sometimes after a single engagement if the mission called for more than a shot or two. Every Hush Puppy kit shipped with spare capsules of replacement wipes specifically because units in the field expected to burn through them fast. Somewhere between the men who lived with that maintenance routine and the decades of second-hand retelling that followed, the suppressor's guts wear out fast and get swapped seems to have hardened into the whole gun gets thrown away. It's an understandable drift. A suppressed pistol that goes noticeably louder after only a few dozen shots sounds to someone hearing about it third-hand 30 years later, like a weapon that was never built to last. But the Model 39 underneath that can was solid steel, designed to be field-stripped, cleaned, and reused indefinitely. And Navy inventory records show these individual pistols rotating through SEAL teams for years, not single missions. In practice, the Hush Puppy was rarely a primary combat weapon. It was a specialist tool carried alongside a rifle or a submachine gun, drawn only at the specific moment when a mission's success depended on absolute quiet, most often during infiltration. When a squad had to slip past a perimeter without triggering a general alarm. A sentry dog tied near a trail junction, a lone guard smoking a cigarette at a checkpoint. These were the targets the weapon was built around, not the running firefights that made up most of a SEAL platoon's combat time. That narrow role matters for understanding why the disposal myth never quite made sense on its own terms. A weapon issued for one specific, low-frequency task inside a much longer patrol wasn't being fired constantly to begin with, which makes the idea of ditching an entire functional pistol after each use even less consistent with how these missions actually unfolded. The wipes wore because they were built to seal an extremely narrow gas path under repeated stress, not because the operators were burning through ammunition at a high rate. A handful of careful shots was often all a mission required, and a handful of careful shots was also roughly the outer edge of what a set of wipes could reliably manage before performance started to slip. Consider everything the SEALs were actually managing alongside that pistol in the field. Every issued kit came packed in a waterproof transport case, the M19A1 box, built to survive underwater insertion and stay sealed until the moment of use. Inside sat the pistol itself, a spare magazine, the replacement wipe capsules already mentioned, a chamber plug and muzzle cap made of phenolic to keep the works dry during river crossings, and specialized subsonic ammunition, a heavy 158-grain green-tipped bullet loaded specifically to stay below the speed of sound, so it never produced a supersonic crackdown launch. That is not the logistics package for a weapon meant to be used once and abandoned. Waterproof storage cases, spare parts, dedicated ammunition, all of it points toward a program built around keeping a small number of precision tools running for as long as possible, not toward disposability. These weren't the only clandestine pistols the Navy fielded during that stretch of the war, either. But they were the ones built with the most deliberate engineering behind them, rather than adapted in a workshop as a stopgap. That distinction matters for the myth. A weapon slapped together in the field out of necessity might plausibly be treated as throwaway gear. A weapon developed at a national laboratory, catalogued with its own Navy designation. Shipped in a purpose-built waterproof case with spare parts and dedicated ammunition, was never engineered with disposal in mind. Everything about how it moved through the supply chain argues the opposite, and these pistols weren't handed out freely to begin with. Total production numbers are genuinely difficult to pin down with confidence, and it's worth flagging that clearly rather than repeating a figure as though it were carved in stone. Some accounts, drawing on operator memoirs like Kevin Dockery's writing on SEAL history, put a single SEAL team's hush puppy inventory at several dozen units, with total wartime production somewhere in the low hundreds. Other sources decline to commit to a hard number at all, noting only that the weapon was built in small, tightly controlled batches for a community that operated almost entirely outside public view. What isn't in dispute is that this was never a mass-produced service pistol. It was a specialist's tool, restricted to naval special warfare and the joint MAC-V SOG units working alongside them. And that scarcity is likely a large part of what let the disposal myth take root in the first place. A weapon almost nobody saw, carried by men who legally couldn't discuss what they'd done with it for decades afterward, is exactly the kind of information gap that folklore rushes in to fill. The hush puppy remained in SEAL inventories well past the end of American involvement in Vietnam. It wasn't retired because the design failed or because it was engineered to have a short service life. It went out of service the way a lot of aging steel eventually does, the locking notches machined into the slide, cut thin to allow that silent lock-up mechanism to function. Gradually developed stress cracks after years of repeated firing. Smith & Wesson had stopped manufacturing the Model 39 entirely by the early 1980s, and with production ended, replacement parts stopped coming. SEAL armourers were left maintaining an aging fleet of pistols with no factory pipeline behind them, and by the mid-1980s, worn examples were quietly pulled from service rather than replaced one for one. The lineage didn't simply vanish, either. Smith & Wesson carried several of the Hush Puppies field-driven modifications, most notably the wider double-column magazine that had been fitted to accommodate 14 rounds instead of the original single-stack 8 forward into its later Model 59. A pistol that owed its grip design directly to lessons learned keeping SEALs supplied with. Ammunition between suppressor-limited single-shot engagements. There's a version of this story where that ending feels smaller than the legend promised. No dramatic river burial after every job, just a suppressor that needed its internal wipes, changed out more often than most people would guess, attached to a pistol built to be serviced and carried for years. But look at what that smaller, better documented story actually proves. The Naval Ordnance Laboratory built a 9mm pistol in the 1960s capable of putting a guard dog down without waking the camp beside it, using nothing more exotic than stacked rubber discs and a manually locked slide, years before suppressor technology of any kind became a serious commercial product. The raised sights, the threaded barrel designed into the weapon from its first blueprint instead of bolted on as an afterthought, the entire system built around one controlled shot and total silence, all of it shaped how suppressed handguns get engineered to this day long after the hush puppy itself went quiet. The myth wanted a weapon so secret it had to be destroyed after every single use. Evidence erased before dawn. The record shows something more interesting sitting underneath it, a weapon good enough and classified enough that when fragments of the truth finally leaked out decades later, people reached for the most dramatic possible explanation rather than the correct one. That's how a lot of special operations folklore gets built, not through deliberate deception, but through decades of silence with a few scattered facts poking through it. Fill that silence with imagination instead of paperwork, and a maintenance routine for a rubber disc turns into a story about a pistol too dangerous to keep. The men who actually carried the hush puppy weren't destroying government property after every patrol. They were doing what any operator does with gear that has to work when it matters, cleaning it, restocking it, and trusting steel that had already proven itself. It was never the pistol that was disposable. It was built to be the opposite, serviced and reissued for the better part of 2 decades. What actually wore out, mission after mission, quietly and without any fanfare at all, was a small rubber disc doing the one job nobody back home ever heard about.